Hi, Mike Zipser here at Balticon 50 in our makeshift TV studio. And with me is best-selling, award-winning author Keith R.A. DeCandido. Keith, welcome to Fast Forward.
Thank you, Mike. It's good to be here.
Yeah.
Again, I think I was on here like
It
a
was a while
ago.
ago, yeah. So welcome back.
Thank you.
Yes. Let's start with talking about the things that have made you an award-winning best-selling author, which is the media tie-ins.
Right.
Because you have won Scribe Awards.
I won a Lifetime Achievement Award
yes.
from the International Association of Media Tie-in Awards. The International Association of Media Tie-in Writers, the IAMTW, or IMTWE, as I like to abbreviate it, but nobody else likes that. I've won that. I got that in 2009. I have never actually won a Scribe Award. I have been nominated for 8 Scribe Awards. I have lost 7. In July, I will probably lose the 8th. My X-Files short story was nominated for a Scribe, and it's up against 3 other stories in the same anthology. So you know, but I've been doing media tie-in work both as a writer and as an editor since 1994.
Wow.
So
You are the man.
I guess.
Or a man.
Amen. Yes. The beard is usually the
yes.
first.
One thing I want to do is talk about a little bit of the process of doing media tie-in, novelizations and stories. Now the production company approaches you?
No, the production company approaches a publisher.
Yes.
It starts, or a publisher approaches the production company or whatever. To give one example, a recent example, I did a Sleepy Hollow novel.
Right.
What happened there was Fox wanted to do books. They did a deal with Random House to do 2 books. The first contract they did was, and so far only contract they did, was for a book that would be The Secret Diary of Ichabod Crane, which would be sort of structured as a nonfiction book. Alex Irvine wrote that. And then a novel. And then once the publishing company signs that contract and does that deal with the production company, then the publisher then turns around and hires writers to do the books. In the case of Sleepy Hollow, they hired Alex to write that and me to write the novel.
Now, how do they find the author? Is it usually somebody that's done this before? Is it
often? It varies from project to project. I mean, honestly, the answer to any question about publishing is it depends.
Yes, that's true.
In the case of Sleepy Hollow, interestingly enough, to keep with that example, the editor who was put in charge of it is somebody who does historical novel fiction. She didn't really have much experience with genre or with tie-ins. So she did her research. She basically sat down and looked to see who was writing stuff like that. And I think partly because I'd written 3 supernatural novels, that was part of why she came to me. And she went to a bunch of other people. And of all the people she approached, I was the only one who didn't blanch at the deadline, which was very tight.
How much time do you usually have to do?
The shortest is 10 days.
Whoa.
That was a movie novelization, which then didn't actually get published, hilariously. But movie novelizations tend to be really quick. I did the Serenity novelization in 2.5 weeks back in 2004, and I didn't have to, which was even worse. But so yeah, ideally my sweet spot for writing a novel is 2 months. Sometimes I need more. Often I have less. There have been times where I've only had a couple weeks. There's a few of my novels I've done in as little as 3 weeks. Mm-hmm. I don't like to do that, and I try to avoid that where at all possible. But sometimes stuff happens.
Yeah.
So.
Now, when you're doing a novelization of a movie, obviously, the plot's there.
Yeah.
It's the movie. When you're writing one of your tie-in novels on an existing show, telling a story that isn't part of the show, do you propose the story?
Again, it depends.
It depends.
For something like Star Trek, which I've done a lot of that, sometimes that's developed in-house. Sometimes the editor will say, hey, I want a book that does this. Sometimes we'll come to them with, hey, here I want, but they're also churning out 12 books a year. So they've got, some things they do are editorially directed, some are writer directed, some are a little of both. The novel I put you in.
That's right. Yes,
I made Mike a character.
Yes.
And
it's called Tuckerization.
Yes. That was part of a series called The Lost Era, which was 6 novels that took place in the 70 years between the last original series film and the premiere of Next Generation. There's about a 70-year gap in the timeline there. So we were doing stories that filled in that gap. That was a case where it was little of both, because there were like a bunch of different stories that could have been told in there, and Marco Palmieri, who was the editor at the time, went to a bunch of different authors and said, hey, you want to do something for this, So I proposed the Butrika Nebula incident, which was something we knew nothing about except for a 30-second conversation between Bashir and Garrick, and I built a whole book around it. So sometimes that'll happen. Other cases, it's completely open. You can throw whatever you want. Like, for example, I did a Leverage novel a couple of years ago based on that show. That was just, the editor was Ginger Buchanan at Ace Books, who has since retired. And that, a bunch of different people just submitted proposals, and the licensor took the ones that they liked the best, including one of mine. In this case of Sleepy Hollow, Fox actually had a bunch of one-sentence pitches that we could pick from if we wanted. It wasn't required, but it's like, which was a good guide for what they were interested in, and also one of the biggest problems with doing a tie-in to an existing property that's still, doing stuff, is that you don't know what they're going to do. You sometimes they have something in development that contradicts what you're doing. In fact, that happened with Sleepy Hollow. I proposed something that involved a sword that this was actually the case in the Revolutionary War. There were 10 elegant swords that were issued to 10 different heroes of the Revolution. They were awarded in 1775 and then actually presented in 1785 because it took that long to make the swords. It was the 18th century. These things took a while. And my idea was that the swords actually had runes on them that could cast spells and do magical things, because Sleepy Hollow. And they said, great, we love it, can't be a sword. And then, of course, in the second season, they had a magic sword as part of the plot of the overplot of the climax of the second season, so that's why I couldn't have it be a magic sword, so I made it something else. The basic idea was still the same, and the inspiration was still the same, but I had to come up with an award. I made it be a cross instead that was given an award. So that will happen. But it varies. And some people are more hands-on than others. There were a series of Heroes Reborn novellas that tied into the series that NBC did, the revival of that. Those 6 novellas were very tightly plotted with assistance from the studio. In fact, of all the tie-ins I've done over the last 2 decades, this was the one where the production crew of the show had the most direct involvement. The person who approved my manuscript was the second in command of the showrunner after Tim Crane. It was James Middleton, who was the executive producer of the show. He read everything, he guided everything, he made suggestions. They wanted these novellas to be part of the overall story. And so all of us had very specific guidelines. Some were looser than others, but they were all very much directed by the people running the TV show, which made it, I think, a better experience both for the readers and for us, because we knew we had the support of the source material.
Right, right. So when you write the novelization or the tie-in novel, it goes back to the publisher and then the studio and the showrunner. There is somebody who works for the company that actually owns it, some representative or other, who then has to approve it. Sometimes it's, some flunky in the licensing department. Sometimes it's, I was lucky in that, with the Heroes, it was James Middleton. For that matter, with Leverage, John Rogers, who was the showrunner, was the one who did the approvals. But John also has a background in comics writing, so he has some knowledge of the business already. So he knew what to look for and what to do. A lot of times, the people involved with running the show don't get directly involved because they don't have time. They're too busy running a TV show. Yeah, every week they got to get a show out.
Hilariously, actually, I did 3 Supernatural novels, and the first 2, I wrote one and Jeff Marriott wrote one, and they came out and everything was fine. And there was somebody at Warner Brothers who approved it, somebody in their licensing department. The people involved with Supernatural didn't really have time. My second novel, though, the third novel that came out, was called Bone Key, and I turned that in during the writer's strike in 07, and 07, 08, whenever it was. And Eric Kripke literally had nothing better to do because he was on strike. So he actually read the manuscript because he had time, and he had feedback on it. And after that, it was his assistant who, in his office. So it was the Supernatural novels after those first 2 all had the approval of the production staff to some degree or other. So that was cool.
Speaking of comics, you've written some comics yourself. Yeah. I particularly remember that you did a Farscape comic.
Yes.
That took place, I think, after.
Yeah, we basically did season 5 of the show in comic book form.
Right.
I worked on those with Rockne O'Bannon, the creator of the show. He provided the plots, and then I scripted based on his plot. We did that for 3 years. Right. We did 3 4-issue miniseries. and then we did 2 years of a monthly comic. And in addition to that, we had a couple other side series, 3 4-issue miniseries with Dargo, and an 8-issue series that Dave Mack actually wrote rather than me, focusing on Scorpius.
Right, which, and I've read those because
Yeah.
I was a Farscape fan,
Yes.
and then I saw, well, Keith's writing one, so I bought them.
Yes, and that was so much fun. That getting to continue the story of Farscape was great. I also wrote a Farscape novel back when the show was on the air in 2001. I did a couple of short stories for the Farscape magazine, and I did a short story for the Farscape role-playing game. And Henson really liked me, and it was funny. That came about. Boom Studios picked up the rights to do the comic. They had brought in Rockney to plot it, and they hadn't nailed down a scripter yet, and I cold called them, which 90% of the time never works. And it worked this time because I said, look, Jim Henson likes me, and Rockney was pushing for me on his. I talked to him first. He pushed on his end. The Jim Henson Company liked me because they had a good working relationship with me from previously doing the novels, and the first thing they said was, well, we really can't afford you. And I said, don't worry about it. I want to do this. And I took a terrible page rate and was perfectly happy to because, for one thing, it was steady work. Even though it wasn't the best page rate in the world, it was a fun experience. I don't regret that at all. And it was steady work at the very least. I did a monthly comic for 3 years, and for one of those years, I was doing 2 monthly comics because of the 3 Dargo miniseries. So that it was great. It was a lot of fun. I miss it. It was. I honestly was hoping it would develop into more comics work, but it hasn't yet. I've done a few things here and there. I've done a couple of Star Trek bits and pieces for IDW. I did a StarCraft manga for Tokyo Pop. And that's about it, really. And I worked on a graphic novel, although I'm not sure how much of my work is actually going to happen on that. So, but I got paid. So.
Yeah. Speaking of Farscape, which
Yes.
was canceled, unfortunately.
Yes.
If you've got a novel, you're working on a novel, you've got a contract to do it, and the show gets canceled.
Usually still happen. I mean, sometimes it'll go away. I mean, as an example, I didn't work on this project, but there were a couple of Dark Angel novels when that show was on the air that came out after the show was off the air because the show got canceled. The 4400 also, Simon & Schuster did that. And what they wound up doing was actually the last 2 novels wound up basically finishing the story because it was left on kind of an odd note, and there was more stuff to be told. So they finished the story of the 4400 in those last 2 novels. I think Dark Angel did the same thing. Usually they'll at the very least, if they've already committed to the novels, they're going to still do them. Yeah. It does happen. That happened with the Leverage books, actually. They commissioned 3 Leverage novels, and then the 5th season ended on Christmas Day. They aired the last 2 episodes of the show on Christmas Day, and then announced the show wasn't coming back, and the first novel by Matt Forbeck was coming out in January. Yeah. And nobody had any idea because the decision wasn't actually made until the last minute. They didn't decide to cancel it until the 5th season was over. It's a cable show that only does 10 to 12 episodes a year anyway, and it wasn't on a regular schedule, so they were ready either way. And they constructed the show in such a way that any season could be its last. They always ended every season on a note where it's like, okay, if the show ends now, we're fine, because they're always kind of on that bubble anyhow. But yeah, all 3 of our books came out after the show was off the air, which made the hardcore fans happy, but it probably didn't help sales any.
Yeah. Now let's talk some about your non-tie-in work.
Yes.
Because one of the things you have, a series of stuff, are your Precinct novels, which you've published some of them through crowdfunding.
A couple short stories.
Some of the short stories, which I backed. And these are, it's a fascinating world. They're police procedurals in almost a classic fantasy world.
Yes.
But they're kind of hard-boiled police procedurals.
The cool thing about science fiction and fantasy in particular is that science fiction and fantasy is a genre of setting. Every other genre is more or less a genre of plot. Horror, mystery, thriller. What makes those what they are is the plot. Science fiction, though, the only thing that makes it science fiction and fantasy is the setting. So it's really easy to meld it with another genre, particularly mysteries. And so what's fun about it is taking the science fiction, in this case, the high fantasy setting, it's a fairly basic Tolkien-esque, Dungeons and Dragons-esque, fantasy setting with humans and elves and dwarves and wizards and such. But the main characters are detectives who solve crimes, and it's fun. It's fun doing fantasy twists on the usual crime stories. And I'm enjoying writing the characters too. The characters actually started out life as two D&D characters. Torin and Danthus were both RPG characters. Actually, one was Dungeons and Dragons in college. The other was in my 20s. It was a role-playing game that was eventually released as the Wildside role-playing game that Lee Grossman developed. Mm-hmm. And those two characters came from that. They were originally RPG characters that were both fairly long-lasting. And for years, I was trying to find a way to do, because I liked the characters so much, I wanted to do, put them into fiction, and I finally hit on this as the way to make it work. In fact, the first novel, Dragon Precinct, some of the characters in the heroic quest the first book is members of a heroic quest are killed off one by one, and our heroes have to figure out who's killing them before more of them are dead. Several of those characters are based on Torin's fellow D&D people in that party from the one in college. So,
you writers just mine everything.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, and they're fun books. The setting is kind of interesting because it's like, well, we had the city guard and somebody else came in and took it over after the war or whatever, and reorganized it and basically made the city guard the detective squad.
Yeah. And they still do other city guardly things, breaking up brawls and keeping the peace and such. But there's also a set of detectives who do the more complicated stuff. So.
And the way you have the city set up, and which ties to the books, and the books are all named after the precincts, which are actual precincts in the cities. Dragon Precinct, we got them down here somewhere. Unicorn and Griffin and Goblin.
And Mermaid
and Mermaid, I think, is the one coming up.
That's the novel I haven't written yet. Yes, each precinct is basically, Griffin Precinct is the castle that's actually the center of the city-state. Unicorn Precinct is the upper-class district where all the rich people live. Dragon Precinct is the middle-class district. Goblin Precinct is the slum, and then Mermaid Precinct is the docks because it's a port town also. So Mermaid Precinct is the main plot. In each case, the title of the book is where the main plot takes place.
Right.
So that symbolizes what and Mermaid Precinct is going to be involving the shipping and boats and sailing and fishing and stuff.
And so, what else are you working on right now?
Well, I've got a few things that are either out or about to be out. I did a Stargate SG-1 novel. It's my first time writing, my second time writing. I did a short story called Cully's Wrath, which by the time this appears on YouTube will be out in both print and ebook form. It's a 5th season adventure of SG-1. I've been a fan of SG-1 for ages, and I had a really good time writing the book. I picked up on a couple of things that the show never really developed. One was a villain called the Ritu, which are from the 2nd or 3rd season. These sort of invisible insect aliens who have a deleterious effect on symbiotes. They were introduced as possible recurring antagonists, and then they never really picked up on it. And also one of the Goa'uld, who we never really saw beyond one brief appearance in a single 2-part episode, was Kali, based on the Indian goddess. And so I developed her as well. And there's a fight involving the Ritu, involving Kali, and also I bring in both Jacob Carter and Master Braytak.
Sounds great.
The two grumpy old men of Stargate SG-1 who get to work together.
It sounds like fun. We've run out of time,
Oh,
unfortunately. No, it's fine.
I didn't even get into everything else. Can I mention one more thing quickly?
Go ahead.
An urban fantasy novel, the series that Wordfire Press has hired me to write. The first book is called A Furnace Sealed, and it's about a nice Jewish boy from the Bronx who hunts monsters.
Excellent. Oh, that should be fun.
Yeah, that'll be out hopefully in either late 2016 or early 2017, depending on how fast I finish it.
Great. Well, Keith, thanks for coming by. It's been fun and educational, and appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, that's it for this episode. So this is Mike Zipser from all of us at Fast Forward saying, take care.